Council of Teachers of English. My kids attended a very large, diverse high school in western Fairfax County, and they self-reported that, yes, there was segregation within the lunchroom and the hallways, and my son, who took AP classes, said it was very white. But what I did see was diversity in our arts, our performing arts, our visual arts, and our athletic teams, and I was wondering, have you looked at that as a role to get kids to mix together? Because those aspects were truly diverse, especially in a time where we're cutting back on the arts and athletics.
All right, thank you very much. Who would like to tackle that question? Well, Kim, since you didn't do the last question yet, I'm volunteering for this one.
Okay, so yeah, I think that is a good place to start, to bring more integration, to integrate more students. But I don't think it should necessarily end there. It kind of, we need to have more integration in our academic classes. We need to have more minorities with access to honors courses and that sort of thing. But I do appreciate, that concept, that idea. I think it's a good one. And I will just leave it at that.
All right, well, does anybody else want to tackle that question at all?
I actually.
Okay, yes, go ahead, of course.
Which is that a piece of what happens when you have a really highly integrated band program, for example, which is where you're going to have all your leaders in your school, is that then what that means is those kids are very likely to take English at the same time and math at the same time. So actually, there's a great deal of academic integration that happens as a direct result, particularly of those co-curricular classes, chorus, band, and theater. When they get to be really diverse and reflective of the student body, of necessity, then those kids are going to move together into other classes. So it's just it's an unintended, really positive consequence.
Thank you, that was good. Thank you very much, Chris. That's great. Did you want to, there's another question in the back? Okay.
Hi, Elizabeth Schneider with the Alliance for Excellent Education, and I had a related and follow-up question for Sammy, which is how are you controlling for the within-school diversity or lack of diversity, segregation? I mean, it's exciting to see the finding. I mean, the reason probably so many of us are here is because of the finding that, diversity actually has a correlation to student achievement, but have you been able to control, and how are you controlling for the in-school segregation, even if the school itself is diverse?
You want to come up here, or why don't you use the mic, Sam? Big.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Well, just to clarify, what I presented was not my own research. It was the background and motivation for research that I'm in, and that research isn't finished yet. And so I'm going to try and recall what I remember from. So one of the findings that I talked about in terms of diversity was it was a synthesis of previous literature, and that was the finding that I reported about mathematics, and that students of all types perform better in mathematics when they're in diverse schools, and that was a synthesis of literature. So I would say that the literature that study used, that synthesized, was literature that used statistical techniques to control for a lot of the other factors that you think might, confound the result. But I don't know, I can't say off the top of my head whether any of them controlled for within school segregation or not. So, sorry.
Right. Good. Thank you, Sammy. Thanks. Yes, go ahead.
Make one comment that dovetails the last two questions. There is a system about a year ago, I requested data from a school system and asked specifically for data pertaining to students who were in classes, like each class. So when I looked at the data for Algebra 2, for example, it looked like overall it was a diverse set of folks taking classes. This is a predominantly, part white and black district. Those are two predominant races in this school system. And I was like, this is great. But when I looked at the classes, there were two sections, and one section, I kid you not, was all white and one section was all black. And I'm thinking, this is the same class. I asked, is the curriculum different? They said, no, it's the same curriculum. How did this happen? Oh, I don't know, this is computerized. I don't think so. I mean, I'm not a computer whiz or anything, but you're not gonna tell me that you got 15 white students classes that they take. Something is wrong, and there has to be a deeper look. So I'm not sure. It would take a lot, I think, of research, following up on the question that you asked Sammy, to have a better understanding of actually what's happening in the classroom, and in the schools with respect to that.
That example really brings it home. Really brings it home, because there's all these ideas out there, but when it gets into actual practices, what really happens? I think that we have some questions. Do we have some questions on the Twitter?
Sorry, yes, and the live stream is up again. One question from Twitter: given that the U.S. is a multicultural society, how can we attain a more culturally responsive education system?
I didn't quite catch the last part of that.
So given that the U.S. is a multicultural society, how can we attain a more culturally responsive education system?
Okay, more culturally responsive education system. Anybody on the panel here want to jump in on this? It's a pretty big question, but I think it's framing this larger issue of a multicultural environment and society. Yeah, it's a little bit like that question. Does anybody want to jump in on that or not? Maybe not. All right. Well, okay. Listen,
like the
whoever
question.
sent that question, we really appreciate it. Is there any other Twitter questions that we could respond to? I'm a little embarrassed, so go ahead. Anybody else?
No, there's another very similar one.
Okay, all right. Listen.
I just want to say that question was very similar, and I think a number of us answered that question earlier, so just to be respectful of the tweet.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was good. Thank you very much. Let's see. Maybe my friend Rick over there maybe have a question. This is going to be a tough one on the panel, so brace yourself.
Richard Collenberg with the Century Foundation. So I'm thrilled that NASB and AIR is taking on this issue. It's so important. And Peter, you had asked the question about kind of what practical next steps. And I want to throw out one idea and get the panel's reaction. There are about 80 school districts throughout the country that look at the socioeconomic status of students in deciding how students are assigned to school. And these range from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Champaign, Illinois to Raleigh, North Carolina. And the idea is twofold. First, that as a legal matter, there are now, unfortunately, constraints that the Supreme Court has laid down on using race in student assignment. And secondly, that as an academic matter, the research always suggested that the reason that African American students did better in integrated schools had nothing to do with the pigment of the classmates, but rather that it's an advantage for economically disadvantaged students to be in economically mixed schools where there are stronger teachers on average, where parents are in a position to be actively involved, and where the peers and the classmates expect to go on to college and serve as positive peer models. So I'm wondering what you all think of that idea of socioeconomically integrating schools through, and I'm talking about, through public school choice, not through, because people always think busing, compulsory busing, but through magnet schools and choice.
All right. Good. You look like you're eager to answer that question. Go ahead. No, you start, and then we can go.
Quick thing. Good to see you again. And we've sat together at many tables before in the past discussing these issues. And I appreciate and respect the fact that socioeconomic diversity is critically important as well. I still stand by the fact that racial diversity is also just as important. And it benefits not only students of color, but also white students as well. And just remember that there is research that shows when you do control for socioeconomic diversity that you still see a racial achievement gap. So you cannot forget that does exist. And also, I know you mentioned, Massachusetts, there are places in Chicago and other places that have looked very closely at some of this. But every place is so unique and every place is very different. So I think it's important that we not think that there's one way to look at and address this problem that we're talking about today. And perhaps there are student assignment programs and plans that can be centered around socioeconomic diversity. And yes, the Supreme Court did limit your ability to consider an individual student's race and assignment, but you may take account of racial demographics, which is permissible under that same case. So I just wanted to flag
All
that.
right, that's good. Chris, you touched on this, so maybe you want to get involved.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, part of the issue, too, I think, is that there are huge numbers of school districts where you cannot divert. I mean, Petersburg, the city of Petersburg is, I mean, there are schools where the number of non-African-American students is so low they can't publish the data because it would violate FERPA regulations. You can't diversify those school systems. So the question is, what do you do when the entire school division is not diverse? I happen to think that charter schools are a good idea, if that's what you meant by public school choice, partly because charter schools in most of the country are given the kind of flexibility to do some things that are outside the box. And I think that if you look at schools that are trying to address maybe non-diverse, I mean, at the end of the day, the question is, what do we do to make students better prepared to take their place in 21st century, to be productive citizens, have a living, to have children, have a family, and do the sorts of things that we all want our children to do. And I think that one of the things with charter schools is that the ones that are good, and the public school, the traditional public schools that are good, are the ones that bring in other resources that help to replace the social capital that may not exist in some of the communities. There's a traditional public school in Virginia, in it probably about a 60% Latino community. The principal brought in the local community services people. The principal started an English language course for the parents. The principal started a pre-K program so that in that school for 5 hours a day you would have the parents, the pre-K student, and the third grader or fourth grader, and they suddenly became a family environment that ensured that they began building on each other and helping each other. That's the sort of thing I think that charter schools can do. Traditional public schools can do them too. One of the things I think state boards have to do is to make certain that they give that kind of flexibility to local school systems and local schools to be able to do it. I think part of the issue we have in Virginia is that we dictate you have the money, but here's the money from the state, and here's how you have to spend it. And we too often spend it in the wrong place. I asked how much support we give to the concept of extracurricular activities, which increasingly I'm coming to the conclusion, as Chris said, if you've got kids involved in those kinds of activities, you've got kids that are able to be involved in some other things. And our support amounts to a small percentage of the stipend, nothing in terms of equipment, nothing in terms of the larger stipend, and literally nothing. So if a school district budget begins to be reduced, what are they going to cut? They're going to cut those things that are not part of the 4 core subjects, and that becomes the tragedy. It just starts spiraling downward.
Thank you. Kim, did you want to jump in on this question?
I would just say that even with socioeconomically diverse schools, we still, we can't forget about racial disparities and racial discrimination. Teachers and educators still need to be prepared to be culturally competent and sensitive to the students within that school community. I don't think we can afford to forget about that.
Thank you. Thank you. We have some questions. Let's see. How about this lady in the back right there? Well, we guess that'd be fine.
Thank you. My name is Shamoya Gardiner. I'm with the DC State Board of Education, and this question is for all of the panelists and Sammy. There are schools like Urban Prep in Chicago and Valor Academy of Leadership in Jacksonville that cater particularly to Black males and have seen large rates of success. What do you have to say to those schools? Because this panel comes from a place that assumes that segregation is bad.
Well, I think it's for all of you. Who wants to start?
My view is that if what you're doing is successful, keep doing it, and if it's not successful, shut down. It's as simple as that. our obligation, as I said, is to make certain that students are productive citizens. Now, that frankly includes the ability to live and thrive in a diverse society and to understand the impact of diversity and the positives it brings to life. But I think that, we've talked a great deal about discipline, and I had told you beforehand about an elementary school in Richmond where when new students come in, there is a spike in suspensions. Now, the principal is African American, but the principal takes the view that this is, she calls the parents, she bothers the parents say, what are you calling me for? She says, because it's your child. They complain to the school, the central administration. But after a period of time, it stops because the expectations are that we want good behavior in this school and we want academic excellence. And that school, which is 80 to 85% free and reduced meals, their scores are 10 percentile points above any given demographic within the state.
Oh, that's fantastic.
To
Interesting.
me, that works.
Yeah.
Now, whether that will work at another school, I don't know. A lot of it has to do with, frankly, the individual leadership. It works in that school because that leader fostered it.
Yeah.
It worked in the other school that brought in all the other support mechanisms because that leader fostered it.
Right.
And that's what I mean when I say that state boards have to give that kind of flexibility.
Yeah, good. I'm wondering if Letitia and Kim, do you have a response to the question that was asked about the boarding schools?
Did you say boarding or charter schools? Was it both? Both? Oh, okay. Well, so one of the things that I mentioned earlier about NASB is that we're working with our states to kind of to take the lead on closing opportunity and achievement gaps. And one of the things that we believe they can do that's effective is raising awareness of best practices that are working in local districts and schools. So I think that districts that are schools that are homogeneous like that, racially homogeneous, should also be elevated as, doing what works, and that best practices from those schools should be adhered to and pretty much applied to some of the districts and schools also in that state. One of the things that we work with our state board members to do is to build statewide task forces that include representation from local districts, schools, communities, and such. And so I would imagine that those schools and leaders in those schools should be at the table, should be talking about how what they're doing and what works for students, because I think that can be applied to across the board for all students.
Tisha, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't want to misstate the end part of your question, but I heard you say something like we are coming at this from segregation is that what you're saying? Okay. So I think we all appreciate in this room that schools today are even more segregated than, public schools today are more segregated than they were at the time of Brown versus Board of Education, right? So we know that there are schools that are racially isolated, and I agree with everything that my co-panelists just said about ensuring that schools as they exist are high performing and high achieving, and that students actually have access to meaningful educational opportunities within that context. At the same time, intentionally prevent that, I think, would be problematic. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that it's not, we understand the context that we're working within, and if something is working, that's wonderful. That's great.
All right, that's great. We're just about out of time. I'm going to give the Twitter folks another chance to redeem ourselves. Is there a question? Then that'll probably be the last question. If we don't have a Twitter question, one more, and then we'll break up.
We do have one. Would the panelists like to address access to effective teachers? What can urban schools do to attract and retain the best teachers?
All right, a good question. I think that's one we have to answer. All right, why don't we, who's eager to jump in first? Anybody? All right, it looks like I saw you reach for your mic, so okay, go for it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that states need to look at is how they are allocating funds from Title I-A and Title II-A to support teachers that are in high-need schools with high-need students. I don't believe enough money is going to professional development. I think that there is some room to kind of revisit that and maybe make some readjustments in that area. but that would be my suggestion.
All right, cool. How about Chris? Do you have a thought on this?
No, I was going to say, I spoke to a principal who simply said, you know, I hire the teachers in my school, and I'm not looking for somebody who wants to come here to go to work. I'm looking for someone who wants to come here with a passion for a mission. And that's fine for that school. Problem is there probably aren't enough of them because there are too many schools that need the help. One of the things that she also pointed out to me, though, she allocates from her resources a ton of money for professional development that is not allocated from the school district or the state or anyone else. It is a tragedy that we do that, and we take teachers that are brand new teachers and put them in the toughest schools. We don't have a pay differential that reflects working in challenged schools and trying to help in challenged schools.
Yeah.
And I think we need to figure out a way to do that, all of which is above our pay grade here, I think.
Yeah, all right. I'm going to let you have the last word here, and then I think we're going to break it up.
I don't need the last one, but I'll just say quickly that I agree with that. I think professional development is critical. Everyone can grow. Everyone can learn. Every school can stand to improve, regardless of whether or not it's at the top right now. With respect to educators, principals, I think it's imperative to understand that what works in one school or one district may not work somewhere else. So you take an educator who's highly successful one place, they may face certain challenges if they were moved someplace else, perhaps to one of these other schools that is struggling. And so that's why the professional development piece is so critically important. And you also may be dealing with different demographics with respect to students and the surrounding community. So that's what I'll say.
That's great. Well, I'd like to give a round of applause for our panelists and for Sammy for really engaging conversation, and to thank them again. You did a fantastic job, and I don't know if you all hang around for a little while. Maybe people have some questions they want to talk to you. No, all right. Thanks so much. Much appreciated for those here and for those who are watching us virtually.